Hello, I'm Yang Rui in Beijing. In this edition of Dialogue, we shall take issue with the draft amendment to the current law on the aged people and the retirees in China. Adult children are required to take care of their parents according to this amendment. Filial piety has been held dear for centuries in the traditional Chinese culture until recent decades, when the one-child family planning policy as well as massive migration have raised questions about the draft law. Joining us now in the first part of the program in the Beijing studio is Mr. Gregory Yingnian Zhang. We shall be talking to Mr. Edward Lehman in the second half, but before we start the interview, let's look at this.
China is dealing with the problems of an ageing society. Under a draft legal amendment, elderly people could go to court to claim their right to be physically and emotionally looked after by their children. Taking care of parents is part of traditional Chinese culture, but migration and work pressures have been fracturing family ties. An eighth of the population is over the age of 60, and more than half of them live alone. Decades of China's one-child policy have left fewer workers supporting more and more elderly relatives. And while the number of nursing homes is growing, authorities have been recently alarmed by stories of old people dying unnoticed in their apartments. With the number of senior citizens rising, more will have to be done to meet their material, emotional and spiritual needs. The amendment clause is one such step.
Welcome to Dialogue, sir.
Yes, sir.
Many believe that visiting parents regularly is something compulsory and should be written into law. What's your take?
I think it's a good idea to try to do it, but I don't think that's the final answer. Because there are many other things involved. For example, whether the parents and the children have such a good affection, a linkage, a charisma, or mechanics or chemistry to go together. So you cannot force it. You cannot force a child to visit his or her parents when things are not happening in the right direction. So this intent is well, but it's not good enough to get the job done.
But what do you think of the backdrop against which this draft amendment has been proposed?
Obviously, there's a problem now happening in China. That is, a lot of parents, they do not pay attention to their parents. Children do not pay attention to their parents. They leave the family, then they forget everything. So we are pointing out this issue. That's good enough. Nevertheless, we have to look at it in a broader picture. For example, whether we should improve the government services to provide better support to the elderly people. We have traditions that can be reinforced. We have education programs, and media, publicity, and so on. So we have just pointed out the problem, but the suggestion to have amendment to get a job done is totally insufficient.
Do you think this marks a regress of conserving traditional Chinese culture?
Obviously, because whenever you have a good tradition in China, if it is sustained well, it's been maintained, you don't need anything extra to back it up. At this time, it's been pointed out by experts or by legislators that we have to do something about it before it's too late. So again, it's important to point this problem, but I'm afraid we need better solutions than forcing them to go home to visit the parents.
Here is something controversial on the internet during the cyber debates amongst the younger generation. Now they complain that such an amendment law might infringe on their individual freedom. This would be viewed by the elder generation as unpleasant, quite against the Chinese tradition, and therefore not decent enough. What's your opinion about the rebellious character and attitude of the younger generation?
Let me try to define what filial piety is. It's an action of devotion, of love, of caring, of feedback, of gratitude to the parents. It happens naturally. It is not that you are required to go back to visit your family on a regular basis, because they are the ones to bring you up, to give you the life to begin with. So in normal situation, this family unit should be strong enough to sustain by itself. So in most families, I suppose, everywhere, China, United States, anywhere else, you can see the families have a positive climate. You know, people on both sides, whatever generations, 3 generations, for example, can interact with each other willingly, happily, and voluntarily. If someone tell you, go home and visit the parents, it's ridiculous. For example, we talk about put into law. First of all, how do you define a person have not returned home to visit the parents on a regular basis? What do you mean regularly? Secondly, maybe there are other conditions existing to prevent the person from going home. For instance, a migrant worker working far away, have no vacation, has no financial capacity, or maybe a son studied abroad. So you have to be very careful to make a law, try to apply it across the table, but that cannot be done in such a way.
Cultivation of filial piety has taken centuries in Chinese society to make it a tradition, and these days in a commodity-driven society where commercial interests serve as the motivation for most of the people to earn their bread and butter. Now, given the rapid pace of their life, do you think it is a realistic requirement for children, particularly adult children, to look after their children and for the 3 generations to live under the same roof?
I think, first of all, the Chinese adult children are trying their best to return home. For example, this Spring Festival is coming up. It's very difficult to get a ticket or a ticket to get on an airplane or train. So in most cases, I think great majority of the adult children are trying their very best to go home. What the portion we should pay more attention to, for example, they are poor workers. They're working day in and day out away from home. And for some reason, they don't have a connection to buy a ticket, or don't even have vacation to go home. So they are the ones we should care of. We'd like to see the government has a policy, for example, the corporations, to give those poorly paid workers a paid vacation to go home. Not necessarily a Chinese New Year, maybe a parent's birthday or their birthday. So they're the ones you support. I think most children would have the natural tendency to go home to visit their parents at a time of celebration. That is not an issue at all.
We appreciate your proposal for the company and the authorities of the company to pay the workers to have a regular holiday making so that their parents can be looked after in this way.
Say once a year, for example.
Once a year, but labor costs will rise accordingly, and this will further drive away further FDI, foreign direct investment. And
not really.
Labor cheap era will come to an end.
You have to look at the total package. For example, if you have such a practice, 2 things would happen. Number one, those workers are encouraged to go home, so they come back recharged. They may reach the level of productivity, and also the companies themselves.
Let me ask you this question again. I'm afraid in the feudal society where the level of production was pretty low, you might expect children to stay with their parents from the beginning of the year through the end. But this time around, given the rapid pace of the market-oriented economy, a lot of the migration is taking place in this new emerging market, and therefore, will it be far more difficult for young kids and adult children to look after their elders? And if you, upon your request, and if we accept your proposal, the employers would pay their employees for at least 1 year's leave designated for their parents, or taking after looking after their parents. Then the labor costs will rise, and the labor-intensive era will be coming to an end.
Well, whenever you have a large company operating in China, anywhere else, you have to take a look at the total picture. For example, you have to calculate this as a part of your necessary expenses, because you spend $5, you get $10 back. Because when you have such a good program implementing, 3 things happen. Number one, as I mentioned before, the employees be happy to have a recharge, come back refreshed. The second is the image of the corporation is enhanced. True. And thirdly,
the corporate social responsibility can therefore be enhanced if they can allocate a fraction of their revenue for homecoming.
Why not?
Of the employees.
Why not? Why not? I do not believe that a little added cost, what's going to happen is allow them to go home without deduct payment from the payroll. So that is not that much. But that input by itself is a humane action to give the corporation a better image overall. I think that investment is very much worth it. Don't let that go. Why not? Give it a try. For example, find a corporation that has this intent. Maybe a joint venture company say, do it. Maybe Guo Taiming or whoever is a big shot already, do it. I think it's worth a try.
Right. In doing that, the image of the company will be improved, and loyalty of the employees for the company will be promoted a lot. And this is a matter of corporate social responsibility. What if those elder retirees are left behind and marginalized by the rapid economic development, then in some cases, extreme cases in particular, they die alone at home without being discovered in time. Such kind of sensational stories often appeared on the front pages.
Right. Well, to solve that problem, you cannot at all depend on the children to do the job by themselves, because you need social services, you need government programs to give, first of all, those retired people enough minimum income to preserve their dignity. And secondly, they should be provided with a reasonable medical care. And then, of course, for example, in the United States, they have a program called caregivers. That is, people can be hired to go to provide at-home services to the elderly, whether they are professionals or relatives and so on, can be even children. So we should look at this issue as on a larger picture to decide what the society and the government has a role to play, not just depend on the children themselves, because in many cases it's beyond their capacity to do a good job at all.
That's the commitment of the government. Thank you very much. We have to leave you there for the moment. You are watching Dialogue with Mr. Gregory Yin and Zhang. We are discussing the draft amendment to the law on family. Stay with us. We'll be right back after this short break.
老年法呀应该，但是现在的年轻人有好多，他就搞忘了，不是像我们那代的人，我们那代的人的话不可忘。
我觉得也可以噻，反正孝敬父母嘛，是中国人的美德噻。
这个作为这个回家看父母，我认为它更多的是一种道德领域，是一种情感领域。那么法律强行的介入干预的话，我觉得超出了这个法律的这个作用范围，法律不是万能的。
这样的话也给一些企业有时候不给那就是休那种探亲假啦，或者什么东西，也给他们一定的制约。我觉得这样的话对那个员工的话会有更大的利益。
是孝敬老人，这是应该的，这个不存在的这个是不法律不法律的事。
哎呦，2年回去一趟。
因为我们年纪大了，应该就常回来看看，
经常回来，星期天呐就回来呗。
那倒还挺好的。
工作了，你经常叫他回家看看咋工作了还，就是有时候是春节吧，或者是国庆节，有时间了回家可以看看哈。
在你有工作，你不能这个放下工作去看父母啊。是不是啊？
儿子经常在夜班，虽然在这里呢，经常在夜班很晚回来，我们也不怪他。都理解。
情感上面重要嘛，经常打电话也好啊，是吧？了解情况，父母也放心啊。
Looking back, life is not easy by any means in the eventful year of 2010. I feel lonely sometimes, particularly when I'm tired. But the moment I think of you, particularly the professional team behind me, I immediately get a lot of inspirations and strength. Trust me, I do enjoy my work and the dialogue I have with you, the rest of the world, and sometimes with ourselves. We would remain true to facts, our minds and hearts, and above all, to our faith. Ideas and truth matter. In the years ahead, we would remain the source of both. Happy Chinese Lunar New Year and have fun.
New shipping hub in Northeast Asia. Reaching the world from Northeast China. Port of Dandong.
A happy Chinese New Year to the world from Baodi in Tianjin. A happy Chinese New Year to the world from Baodi in Tianjin.
Spring Festival, China's most important traditional holiday. It's all about going home, being with family, and celebrating. We present a special series. See how people in different parts of China and the world welcome the Lunar New Year. Find out their hopes and wishes. as well as those of foreigners living in China. Only on CCTV News.
Welcome back. We are joined in the second half by Mr. Edward Lehman and Mr. Gregory Inenjiang. We are discussing the draft amendment to a law on how to look after the retirees and the aged people in a society that is fast-going demographic changes in this major emerging market. Welcome back, Edward. What do you make of a similar law or similar regulations in the U.S. that require children to look after their parents?
Yeah, I don't think it would ever happen, quite honestly. I mean, we have something called elder law. We have a lot of attention towards the elderly in the United States, but a codification of having a law where children are looking after parents, I think would be extremely difficult to enforce, and that's why they probably don't have it. Now, I believe that laws are just codifications of morals. So basically, you know, in the United States believes that it's a moral country, certainly, and that our laws and regulations are a reflection of our Judeo-Christian background. But the truth be told, it's extremely difficult to enforce. I mean, we do have elder care, but it's not one in which children are entitled to look after or imposed to look after their parents, for sure.
Do you think the legal compulsion can make any difference to the solitude of the elder generation if China claims to be a traditional culture where children can voluntarily look after their children despite the great changes that have taken place over the past 3 decades since the economic reform?
Yeah, you know, I mean, I think it's a matter of education. I think that this law is, I mean, it's a rewrite of a 1996 law on how to take care of the elderly or the aged. You've got 167 million people over the age of 60 years old in China. You've got 1 million over the age of 80. So this is an issue when we've got this shifting, like you said, this progress over the last 30 years, and Gregory had talked about it earlier, and we've got a shifting in this economic situation, and people are living farther away from home and everything else. And so what this becomes is a line in the sand by the Chinese government saying, hey, listen, this is a responsibility we need to educate people on. I mean, the one thing I think, and I'm not sure it was discussed before, but China has in its constitution that parents must look after their children and that children must look after their parents. So this is not necessarily a new situation, but what they're trying to do is codify it. So I guess they can have economic damages if someone decides not to take care of their parents. But I think it also brings up a wider question, Young Ray, which is what are considered to be children? I mean, are the ones that are adopted by foreign parents in the United States, for example, that are Chinese, if all of a sudden a parent comes forward and they say, hey, listen, my child, I know who it is, it's adopted in the United States, does that American parent then does that child have to take care of that parent that's in China? It'd be very interesting.
The parents by birth, by blood, and the parents by adoption. I mean, this is a very different one from another.
Or de facto even, right.
Let me mention another segment. For example, even if we have such an amendment requiring the children to revisit the parents on a regular basis, if they don't, the parents can take them to the court and say, come home. Think about it. I won the case, here you are, so you're visiting me, I'm glad you're home. What would be the consequence of such a visit? So many families, you don't have the affection between the parents and the children. Maybe it's better off for them not to see each other.
Perhaps, yeah.
So you cannot enforce something like that. You cannot legislate a behavior, say you have to be nice to your neighbors. If you don't, you're punished. So in this case, how do you define coming home regularly? Second, if not, how can you punish them in such a way that would make things getting better? So I think the intent is good, but the method is in the wrong direction.
Yeah, well, certainly, and Young Ray and Gregory, I mean, I couldn't agree with it more, but what we need to do is take a look at, once we write this law and regulation, then how do we enforce it? And, I mean, that's exactly what Gregory is saying. But the step is, are we as employers going to then have mandatory time off where they're going to make this action? So there's this law that says you have to go back to visit your parents. I agree with what Gregory said. Gee, I can just imagine what this meeting is between parents that don't like and children that don't like each other. But at least in the legal sector, in the employment sector, you can say to your employer, hey, listen, the Chinese law has said to me I have to look after my parents and I must go back to visit them. I need to get compensation. So then now this burden shifts to the employer that they take care of.
Edward, you know, I appreciate one of the points you raised earlier, that the relationship between children and the parents. Now you have a complicated issue by referring to the Chinese kids who have been adopted by American parents. Now let's look at the difficulties that arise from the marriages. Now, if the son marries a daughter, then daughter-in-law, son-in-law might be at loggerheads with their new parents. Now, in this case, what's the possibility for them to share the same roof, to share the same big apartment?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think that what allows you to be civil with one another is space. In sometimes in Chinese housing, you don't have as much space as you might have in other countries, and having a whole bunch of folks under one roof is going to be, you're right, you create a war that happens between these folks. And so, and as a result, we've talked about this before on Dialogue, which is the cost of what apartments are and the cost of housing, and then the responsibility of having a big enough house to house not only your parents but your wife's parents. So yeah.
Let's take a look at Taiwan, where traditional Chinese culture has taken root in the hearts and minds of many people, young and old alike. Is it possible for 3 generations to live under the same roof? And question number 2 for Edward. In America, do parents, I mean the elderly parents, often visit their children other than the family reunion on Christmas?
Let me mention this first. I do not believe have 3 generations under one roof is by itself necessarily a blessing or nightmare, because many other factors come into play. For example, sometimes the grandparents are willingly to join the next generations to be a part of the whole total spirit, but not being forced to do so, not to take care of the grandchildren under the urge of their own children. And secondly, they're in fairly good health and so on. So sometimes it's better to have a grandmother house next door, for example, close enough to be accessible, at the same time not every day together 24 hours.
Depending on how deep your pockets are, depending on the level of your living standards.
The other thing is, I think Edward would agree that in the United States, many retired people go to retirement homes and so on. If in those locations, sometimes they're willing to be there, mingle with people of their own age, because they don't want to be a so-called burden to the children. At the same time, they are given the opportunity to visit them from time to time, and for the grandchildren to come to visit time to time. It's not enforced, it's a willing action taken by both parties.
Edward, what's the family reunion situation like in the States?
Well, you know, I think you're right, Young Ray. I think that people get together on Thanksgiving, they get together on Christmas, they get together for whatever, for Hanukkah, whatever those things are that they get together for. We have 300 million people, so it's quite diverse. But and the truth is that they're not forced to do it, and they don't have to do it. We really have self-reliance in the United States. I mean, there's this move to kick the child out at age 16, 18, whatever that is, and they believe that it's actually a benefit. We Americans believe it's a benefit because we have these children that are self-reliant. Chinese take a different approach, generally speaking, which is, hey, let's keep the kids in the nest as long as we possibly can to try to protect them. And when they do get married, we're going to help them to buy a house, or we're going to work together with them to do that. So it's a completely different approach. And as mandatory to look after your parents. I mean, it's a moral obligation, and so if you adhere to these type of morals, then you would go ahead and do it. But certainly it wouldn't be one in which you would have it in the law. Although having it in the law is not a bad thing, because again, it allows there to be, even though we don't have enough lawyers, it allows there to be economic
It's not a bad
damages.
thing,
No,
but what
no.
if the parents decide to sue you in the court? Will that be a very embarrassing situation? Will that be a headline for the neighbors?
Yeah, it depends on the family, I guess, but it may be a topic.
In the Western,
it's too late, much too late.
That's right.
In
Yeah,
Western
exactly right.
societies, children are encouraged to be independent by the age of 18. Now, if this holds any water, what about the adult children and their attitude to say to their parents, hey, you encouraged us to be independent at the age of 18. Now, at the age of retirement, you should go alone. You should be living. You should be living your life independently with care, mostly from the government instead of from the children.
That's right, and that's the approach the Americans take. That's really the approach, to a large extent. There's many exceptions, of course, but the fact is that when you're a young person, they say, hey, listen, get a job. You know, I'm not going to pay for your school. Do your own thing. And this idea of self-reliance. And so I agree with you. And conversely, when it comes time to take care of the elderly, unless you feel morally obligated or somehow bamboozled into doing it, you would say to your parents, hey, listen, you weren't there when I needed you.
Here is a personal choice for both of you gentlemen. Do you prefer to have home nursing or to live in the nursing homes after you retire?
It depends. For example, if I feel that my children are close enough to come to visit me when I get into nursing homes and enjoy playing bridge or swimming pool and so on. I have that choice. At the same time, I may choose to have a house not far from my children so we can come back and forth easily. So you cannot say one formula is good for all. I think a lot of people prefer to go nursing home if the facilities are good. On the other hand,
but Gregory and Edward, we don't have many Mother Teresas in China who are not that kind. I mean, the attitude of those young nurses in the nursing homes may not be that professional. In that case, for the elderly parents who have got quite accustomed to the warm smiles of their children and the warm smiles of their neighbors and the friendship from around, they would feel quite isolated, quite lonely in the nursing homes if the attitude of those so-called professional nurses are not so professional.
Yeah, you know, what I've seen, though, in the United States is this arc in nursing homes. I mean, meaning that it went from these places that were just institutions where people were housed to what Gregory was talking about, where it's a community where you've got your own post office, you've got your own card games, you've got cinemas, you've got everything going on in there. And then there are degrees of care within those homes, meaning if you're really very, very sick and you need to have someone look after you 24 hours a day, you're in a specific room, but you're in this community. So, I mean, the answer is, like I said, is the ancillary issues that come out of the law. What are now the responsibility shifts to employers to let employees off. The second thing is nursing homes. I mean, it's looked after by the Ministry of Civil Affairs. Now the question is the Ministry of Civil Affairs, which looks after orphanages, which looks after a whole host of things, are they equipped to go ahead and start making these nursing homes that are like small towns?
So what's your personal choice?
Personal choice would be to be in a nursing home, frankly. But I hope that'll be a long ways away. I have no idea. But what I'm saying is to be in a nursing home and to be self-reliant. That just is my own approach. Not because it's not about a love of my family members taking care of me. It's about having professionals that really understand if you are aged. Yeah, and to be with other people that are similarly situated.
The last question, which is very typical of the Chinese national conditions, thousands of parents are sending their children to the other side of the Pacific Ocean or to European countries for academic studies. Now these children prefer probably to stay on after their graduation. What about their lonely parents? Now, do the parents have to go to the court to sue their children?
Let me mention this. In China today, there are many parents anxious to not to send, to advise or to support their kids studying abroad for a better future, and that's understood. And I know in the States, for example, I have many people that I know personally, once they have established themselves, have a career, they invite the parents to visit them. Right. In the States, that happens often. By the time they're studying, because going there at that time is a burden, but afterwards it's a pleasure. So that will happen naturally. Then also they come home to visit, return to China. So that will happen naturally.
More adult children are thinking to invite their children to go to North America and European countries where they live and work after graduation. But the problem is the parents have to study the English, the French, the German.
That's right.
To get
to call the police even.